It's my pleasure to introduce Karen O'Brien, the Executive Director for the Michigan Recycling Coalition. Take it away, Karen.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Appreciate all your support in allowing us to provide this valuable webinar for our members. Thank you all for calling in today. We actually have more than 90 people registered for this webinar, so I do expect more people to be joining us as time goes on. Let's see here. So, funding paint recycling in Michigan. We have been talking about funding paint recycling for many, many years. It is one of those duties that many recycling coordinators in Michigan do amongst their other duties, and it is always difficult to fund this. Latex paint is an especially problematic material, and we'll talk a little bit more about the scope of the problem as we go on. The agenda for today is really to, again, talk about the current state of affairs in Michigan, what household hazardous waste collection and paint recycling is from a county perspective, who's recycling paint in Michigan right now, and then what our options are for funding and increasing paint recycling in Michigan, how the paint industry is responding to our needs, an overview of a paint care program that is happening in other states around the country, and what programs look like specifically in Minnesota. So we will go through that agenda today and hopefully be done in about an hour and a half with time at the end for questions. So just to give you a, kind of an overview of what we're talking about, we don't know as much as we'd like to know about paint recycling, specifically in Michigan, but we do estimate that about 10% of all paint goes unused. I'm sure I've got some in my basement, and you do too. It's estimated about 64 million gallons of paint across the country is unused, and some portion of that, maybe 1.7 million gallons that are in Michigan today. 90% of all paint sold in the U.S. is latex-based. It is at least 50% of the cost, generally, of household hazardous waste collections. Many communities have opted out of providing latex paint recycling opportunities because of the quasi-hazardous nature of this material. But PSI, the Product Stewardship Institute, reports that it costs on average $8 a gallon to properly manage old paint. So it is a burden that is borne primarily by communities, but it is one that the paint industry is aware of and actively seeking solutions for. There is a confusing message around latex paint recycling. It's hazardous in its liquid form. It's not in its solid form, so you can't just throw it away. You've got to dry it out. You can use kitty litter. There's really no specific management mandate, and trying to communicate this to the public is difficult. In addition, we really don't want to manage it as a waste. We really want to recycle it. It is a readily recyclable materials, and opportunities exist to recycle this material in Michigan. But how are we going to divert waste paint, and who's going to pay for it? Those are the questions that we have to answer today. So the next speaker is Kate Neese. She is the Waste Management Coordinator for Clinton County. She is the manages all the special waste collections and helps to manage the 3 recycling drop-off centers in her county. And she offers a very good perspective as a county who is constantly managing latex paint recycling because her residents want that kind of service. But her budget is constrained to offering those. So, Kate, why don't you get us started?
Hi, and thanks again to everybody that's listening in today. A lot of you probably already know who I am because I get around. I'm involved in a lot of different organizations, including the Household Hazardous Waste Roundtable. So I'm going to glean some of my information from just those meetings and my observations and sitting in those meetings. So there is quite a few municipalities and counties that offer regular household hazardous waste recycling or collection programs, and of those, there's really only a smattering that handle latex paint in with the other hazardous waste, and that is because even though it's a low toxicity product, it is a high volume product. All of us have unused latex paint sitting at home. Some of us inherit it when we move to a new house. Some of us leave it behind when we move to a new house. So there's a high volume item out there. Specifically for Clinton County, we do not accept it in our program because even without it, in our hazardous waste budget line, paint and paint-related materials still cost or eat up about 50% of our costs for our household hazardous waste program. So even without the latex paint volume in there, paint and paint-related materials are still a high volume item in our collections. So we're a little gun-shy about accepting latex paint because we fear that we'll completely blow our budget. I know Eaton County, I'm not sure if Mary Beth is on the line, but I'll give her a shout out. Eaton County recently started accepting latex paint as part of their program, and she definitely saw a spike in volume and a spike in her costs. So even hearing that, it makes us even more leery to begin accepting it. So what do our residents do? We get calls about latex paint on an almost daily basis. 9 times out of 10 when a resident calls in with a paint disposal question, it's water-based latex paint instead of oil-based paint. So we give them their options on, reuse or disposal. So there is a need out there. There is a want for us to take it, but they want to do it for free. They don't want to have to pay for it. In that same vein, I work cooperatively with Eaton and Ingham counties and another handful of other municipalities within the Tri-County area to do special collections off and on. We've worked collaboratively to do electronics, and one of the things we did back in 2002 was a latex paint collection, and it was a really good event, and the slide you're looking at now are pictures from that event. You can see there's a guy that came in with 2 cans on his motorcycle, so it comes in every way, shape, or form. And we had charged residents at that time $1 per can, and then our group subsidized any overage and cost for disposal, and we worked with the local company, ePaint Recycling, for that event. It's something we'd like to do again, but logistically it was hard for us to all coordinate a day and time to do it. Here is a slide showing how not to pack your paint for a collection event. And it just makes me giggle, so I had to share. These are photos that were shared during one of our HAZWOPER training classes, so I have to give credit to Tom Dewhurst and Cindy Foster with Kalamazoo County for providing those pictures. They weren't taken at their facility, thankfully, but these things happen when you're hauling high volume or even 1 can of paint to an event. It's a messy, high volume item. With that said, it is something that our county would definitely be interested in collecting if there was a funding mechanism for it, because our current budget could not support the additional volume and cost. So I think I speak for a lot of other communities too that are already doing a regular hazardous waste collection. In our case, we do it twice a year. That would be willing to put in the extra labor and time to also collect latex paint if there was funding for it. Trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to hit. Again, our budget's limited. We'd love to partner to provide this for our residents. It would be a valued public service for sure. And Mary Beth just sent me over an email, so she's on the call. Thanks, Mary Beth. If you want statistics, here's her bit. In the 2 years that she's accepted latex paint, and this is for Eaton County Resource Recovery, she's collected 67,327 pounds of paint. And that's, she allows them to bring in 10 1-gallon cans for free, and after that she does charge them $1 a can, and it's about 35% of her waste stream collected during her hazardous waste events. So that just kind of puts a number to the volume, and that's Eaton County. Eaton County has pretty similar demographics to here in Clinton County. We have about 75,000 residents in our county, and Eaton's a little bit smaller than that. But that makes me nervous. As a program director, seeing those numbers and knowing the price tag attached to that definitely makes me nervous because our budget wouldn't be able to support it. So thanks, Mary Beth, for sharing that. I appreciate it. I don't know what else I want to say, really. I think I can gladly answer questions at the end of the session, but that's a pretty good overview of where we are as, hazardous waste collection and what we'd like to do, because we do see it as a value to our residents. They would love to get rid of the stuff for free, but our budget at this point can't support a free collection of latex paint. So I'll hand it back over to Kieran. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. I do have a quick question for you before we turn it over to Jim.
Sure.
Your involvement with the Household Hazardous Waste Roundtable, are there many other counties in Michigan that are accepting latex paint, or is the trend really not to provide that?
The trend is really not to buy to collect that. I think a lot of us would like to, but again, we all have budget constraints, and when you look at the big picture and the toxicity and the other options for disposal, we just kind of set that aside and say, okay, the residents can take responsibility for that item for themselves because they can dry it out with cat litter and put it in the trash. Yes, it's inconvenient for them, but it saves our budget in doing it that way.
Great, thank you. Good information and fun pictures to see.
I know.
So next up is Jim Cosby. Jim is the president and founder of ePaint. ePaint is a latex paint recycler and remanufacturer of paint in Michigan, on the west side of Michigan. ePaint takes leftover paint and creates a new paint product, selling paint across Michigan, for example, at Habitat for Humanity restores. And as a current recycler of paint, Jim's got a great perspective about how we can increase paint recycling in Michigan. So, Jim, why don't you take that away?
Sure. We have hundreds of dealers actually throughout the United States. Michigan is a leading state for us to recycle paint in, but we have hundreds of dealers that sell our product throughout the U.S. We're capable of recycling every drop that Michigan can produce. We have hundreds of thousands of gallons of paint on walls with an outstanding track record. And that outstanding track record is very important to us. It extends from not just the end user, our phone numbers on the back of every can of paint that we sell, but also with the people we recycle paint with, be it county governments, collection points, just our partners on that side of the operation. We would love to be collecting a whole bunch more paint in Michigan. We need the supply. This paint recycling, as we've told everybody who's ever visited our facility, if you just collect it and warehouse it, you're really not recycling. And paint can accumulate pretty quickly, as you all know. But I can tell you, we have the opposite. We have a good problem, I guess, in that we've created a demand for our product through the quality that we put into, our process. So we'd love to see more paint collection in our home state of Michigan. We've grown, and it's all been safe growth. We own all of our assets, so we're a financially stable, viable operation. We're moving into a new building, hopefully by the end of January. And we also have plans to start recycling solvent-based paint in 2015. And we have good formulas worked out. So, you know, I mean, that's the other part of it. So, and that's one thing I think that's really kind of helped us as a recycler, honestly, is just our technical paint background, if you will. So, so yeah, you know, and as this slide here says, you know, we have a good grasp on, you know, the numbers. We know the numbers inside and out, backwards and forwards. After processing, you know, millions of cans of unwanted latex paint. So, you know, as the last point says, you know, we have great capacity, and we're ready for more.
Jim, can you give us an example or some examples of how you're working with communities in Michigan right now to recycle their paint? Is there a charge for it? What kind of agreements do you have in place?
Sure. Yeah. You know, we're paid by the pound, and we price things. We allow, because budgets are tight, and we recognize that, we allow the counties flexibility to capitalize on the resources they have. So, you know, if paint's delivered to our door, we charge one rate. You know, if we have to work the event, you know, and provide shipping, then, you know, we charge another. We also, for counties that don't have money in the budget, you know, we'll show up to that event and charge residents, you know, right there at the event or at the trunk, so to speak. So, you know, those are the ways that we're working with Michigan currently.
So, Jim, do you have an estimate of how much material paint you get through your Michigan contacts and how much might be available to you?
Sure. Through, you know, all that 67,000 pounds that comes from Eaton County, from Michigan, you know, total, we probably get close to 1 million pounds. So, you know, but we can always use more.
Okay, great, great. Okay, is there anything else that you need to say, or you think you've said what you got?
Ted might have something to say.
Yeah, the residents may want free recycling, but there really isn't any such thing as free recycling of latex paint. If they do as they're instructed and mix it with kitty litter is $4 a bag, and you can do about 2 gallons with it. So they're at $2 a bag anyway. I agree that across Michigan there's a lot of people that say, well, I'm not going to pay to get rid of it, but there's a whole lot more that want to be responsible citizens and will be willing to pay a nominal fee to empty their basements or their garage out. As Jim said, we are more than happy to go up at your recycling event, and there's a number of ways to fund it right there.
Yeah, but I would say generally yes, but I can't confirm that. But I would say
the resident pay at the trunk. So don't let the fact that you don't have in the budget stop you from doing anything. We can still work it out.
Sorry about that. We're getting a little background noise, it looks like. In some of the questions and answers, it looks like Emmett County actually collected in 2013 36,700 pounds of paint from 30,000 people. So we're talking of, you know, at least 1.5 pounds a person, which I think is significant.
Yes.
So we've heard, a bit about the challenges that our recycling coordinators face in Michigan and trying to provide a service or not really being able to provide a service. Even if we do have, recycling opportunities here in Michigan. And really funding this activity is the crux of the problem, and it's the crux of many recycling issues. We could continue along. We could do nothing and continue along in really just educating residents, but even that costs. Educating residents to simply, use the kitty litter option, which will cost them. And we could also, reinforce the waste reduction aspect of what it is we do. Only buy the paint you need. Really get clear about how much surface area you're covering and only buying the amount of paint that you need. But you still have to choose between your quart or your gallon or your 5-gallon. There's not a whole lot of volume options available to us. So, another option to us is to, develop our own legislative tools here in Michigan. An advanced disposal fee, for instance, could be a funding mechanism that we propose. But an option that has emerged for Michigan quite recently is the use of a paint care program, an industry-supported paint care program. And so I would like to introduce Allison Keene, who is the Vice President of Governmental Affairs at the American Coatings Association. The association works as a paint industry advocate to advocate the industry and professionals who work on paint issues and in the paint industry. Allison is the corporate secretary for the organization Paint Care, which is an organization focused on stewardship programs in the United States. So Allison here is to share the perspective of the paint industry and how they are working to increase paint recycling in Michigan. Allison, are you ready?
I am.
All right. You sound a little far away, so you might have to speak up a bit.
Okay. Move this a little bit closer. Thank you so much for having me. And I agree with everything that was said so far. The slide in front of you basically has my information. It also has Marie Clark's information, another counsel that works here at ACA. And both of us do advocacy on behalf of Paint Care. So feel free at any time to call, ask us questions. If we can't answer it and we can't make it up, we'll send you to somebody who can. Basically, the American Coatings Association is your run-of-the-mill. Let me see if I can, for some reason the slides are not advancing for me.
Oh, hold on. I have to give you control. I apologize.
No problem. Basically, ACA is an advocacy organization. We work on behalf of the paint and coatings industry. And that means not just folks that make wall paint and latex paint and house paint, but folks that make the paint that goes on your car and on the planes and boats and you name it. If it's not wallpaper, it's one of our products. There we go. So we work on behalf of the industry to really try to solve problems. And as we just heard from some of the county folks, that paint is a problem, and it has been for a while, and we've been working for a while with different organizations to try to come up with a solution. And the solution I'm going to talk about today that we did come up with through a pretty extended dialogue is called Paint Care. And what we did was we incorporated a true 501c3 nonprofit. American Coatings Association is an advocacy nonprofit, so a little different. And like I said, it's represented by a whole bunch of different paint coating manufacturers, where Paint Care is represented literally by architectural paint manufacturers, separate board. And in addition, it's open to all paint manufacturers. So it's not a dues-paying organization. It's a funded organization, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But if you're selling paint in a Paint Care state, you are automatically a participant as long as you don't mind registering, and it's a pretty easy registration. So I think we already heard why we started Paint Care. I mean, yes, 50, sometimes up to 70% of household hazardous waste tends to be paint. A lot of folks don't collect latex paint anymore, but again, as we heard, they get it anyway. They would like to collect it, but their budgets won't allow it, and traditionally that cost and burden has always fallen on the municipal governments, and as a lower toxicity or hazardous product, many times your dollars are going to go to the more toxic, more hazardous products, and you're going to tell people to dry it out and throw it away. Again, not the easiest thing to do, costs money, kitty litter costs money, takes a while if you've got kids, if you've got, you know, pets, if you live in an apartment. I mean, it just doesn't happen. So we all say we're going to do it, and it all sits in our basement and garages, and it just stockpiles. Studies show that about 10% of paint is left over, and I think we're seeing that in our work in the different states that we're in right now. We're getting about 7 to really 9% of sales. So in 2003, we started working with the Product Stewardship Institute. They initiated a national dialogue with us and EPA and local governments and state governments, recyclers, hazardous waste haulers, other service providers. And to fast forward, you know, we sort of talked around the issue and looked at some solutions. You know, they needed to bring industry to a place where they could say yes, and we needed to bring, you know, some of the regulators to a place where they would say yes. And in 2007, we got there, and in 2009, we passed the First Stewardship Law as a pilot. And there's a couple reasons why we needed the legislation itself. First and foremost, we wanted to make sure that everybody was on an even level playing field. And if you're selling paint in a state that has a paint stewardship program, you have to be part of the program, or you have to have your own program, right? So no free riders. And the other issue is the way that we decided to fund the program, and that was through a fairly transparent fee system. And that fee system really makes it difficult for, well, the competitors get together and they establish a fee that they're going to put on a cost of a product. And in many cases, that can be construed as price fixing or consumer manipulation, what have you. And so we needed a limited antitrust exemption as well. And I'm not being able to forward these slides again.
Try it now, Allison.
Sorry about that.
Allison, try clicking on the window. No?
Yeah, that's what I was doing.
There it went.
There it goes. Now it looks like it. Okay. So, oh my gosh. Well, all right, let me just go back here. So it almost looks like, and I apologize to everybody on it, that we both maybe have control. Am I doing something, or are you doing something? Okay, looks like mine's working again. Okay, so needed legislation for a level playing field, needed legislation to make sure that our financing was consistent and we all didn't get arrested for antitrust violations. Since we had the pilot in Oregon in 2000, we passed the legislation in 2009, started 2010. We've actually had 9 states, and I put that in quotes because the District of Columbia is our 9th, and obviously it's not a state, although folks here would certainly like it to be. So Oregon, California, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, Minnesota, Maine, Colorado, and now DC. And the implementation dates is what you see. So right now we're implementing through Minnesota. Maine and Colorado will come online in 2015, and in 2016 we'll get DC up and running. I think that's going to be it for this year. We had a couple other folks pending, but given that we're almost out of time, even with the full-time legislatures, I think we'll see our 10th in 2015. All right. So what about this law do you need to know? First and foremost, any manufacturer selling paint into the state, like I said, has to operate a paint management system, or they can join Paint Care. And it's easy and it's free to join Paint Care. And the Paint Care program on behalf of the manufacturer contractors has to reduce the generation of post-consumer paint, promote the reuse and recycling, and proper disposal of leftover paint. It requires quite a bit of oversight and enforcement by the state agency, and that means that we submit a program plan to the state. We document how we're going to make this very convenient for folks to bring in their paint for proper disposal or recycling. We have to document how we're going to use environmentally responsible paint management. Basically, we're not going to just collect all this and throw it out on the back 40, but we're going to have reuse goals. We're going to have goals for recycling and certainly proper disposal management methods. There's a big, huge education and outreach component to the paint care program, mostly because it's really a paradigm shift, right? So you've got folks who have been telling you you can't bring your latex paint in to dry it out and dispose of it, and now they're going to say, you know, come on, we can bring it in now. But we also need to be able to reach out to folks and say, hey, there's a whole bunch of new areas where you can bring your paint back as well, and to kind of educate them also because they may see that there's an uptick in the price of paint. I completely agree that paint recycling, like any other recycling, is not free, and we'll talk a little bit about how we fund this, but we like to educate the consumer about it so they know what they're paying for. And then finally, the state will approve that budget and the assessment rate, which is what we use to fund the program. In addition, and that's pretty much a snapshot, but it's usually a little more complicated than that. But in addition to, you know, you get the plan in, you get the plan approved, you start your program. Every year, we need to submit an annual report to the state detailing, you know, what we said we were going to do in the program plan, and if we didn't do it, why we didn't do it, and if there's any changes we need to be made. And that includes how much paint we collected in the state, the method of disposition. So did it go to reuse? Did it go to recycling? If it went to recycling, did it go to recycled content paint? Did it go to a cement kiln? Did it go to some, you know, structural concrete, some other use? And then finally, proper disposal for all the total volume of the paint that we've collected. There's an independent financial audit every year of the program. Again, this is funded by an assessment on new sales of paint that we'll talk about. So there's an independent financial audit just to sort of keep us all honest, make sure that we are doing what we need to do, but the revenue or the costs are not exceeding, or the revenue is not exceeding the cost of the program. We're a nonprofit and we should be run that way. There are provisions for education and outreach evaluation. Like I said, this is a very large component of the program, and we need to make sure that annually we're looking and making sure that our education outreach is getting to the right places, we're using the right media and mechanisms, we do surveys to see, and we adjust those mechanisms on a year-over-year basis. And then finally, there's a reporting and evaluation of the program goals. We said we were going to collect X. Did we? If we didn't, why not? We said we were going to recycle Y. If we did, great. If not, you know, are we going to do something different in the next year? And then finally, it does require an annual fee to the state agency. This is going to look different in every single state. But basically what we're saying is this used to be a municipal issue. And now instead of having however many counties or cities in Michigan sort of be the review, oversight, and enforcement agency, we're going to ask the state to really take on something that in most cases, not in all, but in most cases, is pretty new, and we're going to ask them to be the sort of keeper of this program. And in addition, it's usually good from a political standpoint to sort of zero out the fiscal note and then the legislative level, and since we're asking state agencies to do something new, it usually is going to cost money that's not already budgeted for, and so we provide for that right in the statute and hopefully get over that hump very quickly. Maybe I just have a delay there. Okay, so how do we fund it? Financing is through new paint sales, as I said, right now. I can tell you that in the 6 states that are operating, and the budget's just being done for Colorado right now, we have been able to keep the cost to 35 cents for your quarts, 75 cents for your gallons, and about $1.60 for your 5-gallon containers. I always have to sort of give the disclaimer that I don't know if that would exactly be the case in Michigan. What we do is we have an independent consultant look at how much revenue we expect to generate in a state, and then we do an RFP for services like transportation and recycling, and we look at education outreach costs and operational costs, administrative costs, and we basically just do a divide and conquer. So if we think it's going to cost this much and the revenue is going to be this much, then the assessment rate is going to be this much. And so far, this rate has worked very well and has provided us, again, with the funding that we need to run the program, but not, exceed the cost of the program. So it's a pretty good bet that any new state that comes on board is going to look a lot like this. It's not a point-of-sale fee, so it's not like an advanced disposal fee. It is what I would call like a reverse chain of custody fee. So the manufacturers basically pay directly to Paint Care for every gallon, quart, pint, 2-gallon, 5-gallon container they sell on a monthly basis to Paint Care. But they pass that fee down through the distribution and retail chains, and the distributors and the retailers pass that on to the consumer through the final purchase price of paint. So you may or may not see it when you buy a gallon of paint, but it is there. And we do a lot of education also, even if you don't see it on the receipt. We do a lot of education to tell you it's there, tell you why it's there, what it goes for, and where to bring your paint back, when you're done utilizing it. Who can use the program? We take latex from anybody, all residents, all businesses. It's non-hazardous. We only take oil-based paint from residents and conditionally exempt small quantity generators. And we'll talk a little bit about what that might look like in Michigan. And I usually just show this slide just to show kind of how easy it is. It's not a self-serve program, but basically a retailer or an HHW would have one of our tub skids or totes or collection boxes, whatever you want to call it. Somebody brings in architectural paint. You look at it. Yep, that's it. Put it in our bins. You call us when if you got 2 bins, you call us when one's full. If you've got 16, you call us when 14 are full. We pick up the bins that are full and we drop off empty bins. So it's fairly easy from a collection facility standpoint. And because it is so easy, we're not just using household hazardous waste facilities and events, but many, many, many retailers, paint stores, hardware stores, home improvement stores, Habitat for Humanity and other restores or reuse stores, transfer stations, landfills, recycling centers. We do some paint-only collection events as well, particularly in rural areas that might not have any HHW service or might not have even a paint store. And then we've also instituted direct pickup service. So if you're a contractor or somebody who's been sitting on a lot of paint and you have 300 gallons or more, instead of dropping them off at one of our collection sites and overwhelming them, we will come directly to you and pick it up. So a couple highlights about the programs that are already in place and have been in place, enough for me to actually give you some good data. And Oregon, we're actually into our 4th year now, but here's some 3-year highlights. It started in 2010. They had about 15 HHW programs, and only half of those were permanent. Most of them, and even the permanent ones were like, sort of 1 day a week, but most of them were events, and some of them were every other year, not even every year. So that's basically what you see on the top map. Once Paint Care came in, almost immediately we had about 90 sites in the first year in that 2010. We're up to about 140 sites right now, and that's what you see, that coverage down there. 95, almost 96 now % of residents have access within a 15-mile radius, 20-minute drive basically to drop off paint to recycle or to properly dispose of. And most of those sites, because Oregon didn't have too much HHW to begin with, are retail sites or transfer stations. This is how much we've gathered in Oregon in the first 3 years, alkyd and latex. And this is a snapshot of basically the disposition for what we got. So of the latex, what went to paint, you see the majority of it did. So that's new recycled content paint. Some went to a very weird process that you probably don't have in Michigan. It's called biodegradation, very specific to some dry landfill issues out on the east coast of Oregon. A little bit to paint reuse, and that's basically latex as well as oil-based. Rest of the oil-based goes for energy recovery, and then a little bit to biomass, which is really the back end of a cement kiln, and a cement additive, which is the front end of a cement kiln. So this is all documented in our annual reports. I just kind of pulled out some highlights for Oregon and California and Connecticut because, you know, we have them, but there's a lot of data. California, we just submitted our second annual report. This is year one data, but we started in 2013. We have more than 650 drop-off sites. Almost immediately, we're on our way to over 1,000. Right now, we have 90% of residents there within a 15-mile radius, and we're looking again to, the convenience goals has 90% within a 15-mile radius, but we now have more than 97% of the population lives within a 15-mile mile radius of the site. So doing good in California. I have to give some props to California's HHW. Had a lot of good infrastructure to begin with, so it was a little easier than Oregon to build off of, and we were able to do it, I think, a little bit faster. Also, we learn as we go, and California was the second state, and it was a pretty big state to undertake. But I think the subsequent states that we've been working in, we've been able to learn from the California program, and they've benefited from it. So here's some California highlights. This is about almost as much as 3 years in Oregon in 1 year in California, but that obviously is because of the population. And sorry about that. You see that again, though, even though we collected the same amount in 1 year as almost 3 years in Oregon, the percentages of where it went, latex and oil-based paint, are almost identical, right? So almost 80% going for paint-to-paint, to recycle content paint, a little bit to reuse. The beneficial use is a mix of things like CD, alternative daily cover for landfill. Some of it is landscaping stone. Some of it is asphalt, traffic coating or coatings that you would use instead of asphalt coatings. And then all the oil-based paint is basically going for energy recovery. In Connecticut, we've been in Connecticut just over a year. We, again, learned a lot from the Oregon and California programs. Connecticut never accepted latex paint, never accepted latex paint. So we started with 7 one-day paint collection events in July and August of last year, and that really helped to sort of drive the legacy paint out of everybody's houses and basements and get it into our recyclers before we opened up the wide berth of collection sites. And once we did that, we started with about 80 sites. We're up over 90 now. And the other thing that is new for us a little bit in Connecticut is that many people still self-haul their garbage. So the transfer stations in Connecticut were really interested because even though they supposedly didn't take latex paint, people would hide it in their garbage and they'd get dumped on anyway. And as we said before, you don't want that liquid in your solid waste stream. So we have 20 plus transfer stations even before the program launched that had signed up, and I think we have even more now. So Vermont started this year in 2014. Rhode Island started this year in July. Minnesota started November. And as I said before, Maine and Colorado will come on board. They're both slated for, at probably the earliest at this point, in July. And then D.C. is now slated, and that was just signed by the mayor last week, actually Monday. That's slated for 2016, and that's really going to be it for this year. We passed Colorado and D.C. this year. Those are the two newest, like I said, quote-unquote states. So, future states, where are we? So basically this map shows you in the dark green where the legislation is already passed. It shows in the yellow where the legislation is most active. active, I would say, because most legislators are actually out right now. But, for example, New York and New Jersey are full-time legislatures, and it is still pending there. Massachusetts as well, but you know, in December 11th, I don't think there's any way anything more is going to pass this year. So we'll be back. We'll be back in Washington next year. We'll be back in New York next year, back in Massachusetts, back in New Jersey. Probably not back in New Hampshire, but we'll certainly be working it in New Hampshire. Probably not completely back in Illinois, but certainly be working it because it's pending anyway. And then what I did is I just listed out all the other states that have at least, you know, said they were interested in, or we've talked to, or you know, had any conversation with, basically. And you see Michigan is on the list, and as I'm looking at it, Wisconsin needs to go on that list too. So, but Florida we've talked to. We've actually run the bill in Texas 2 years ago. New Hampshire, we ran it last year. Missouri and Oklahoma and Pennsylvania and Utah we've just started to talk to, similar to Wisconsin and Michigan. So what does it mean for you guys? What do we need to do? So, you know, the first and foremost, I really appreciate these type of opportunities, and I appreciate the department and the counties and the cities that have reached out to me and said we're interested in this, and this is exactly how we get the conversation started. So I'm going to continue to work with the department. Right now we do have some support. But we really need support from, you know, the administration, and to do that, we really need to get our ducks in a row. We need to get all the information that we can to basically support a legislative push. How we do that, I've actually have a contract with the Product Stewardship Institute, who was the facilitator of the big dialogue that really produced this model legislation, to put together fact sheets, to work with you, with the HHW community, whether county or city, the municipal governments, to say, look, what's being collected now? How much is it costing municipalities? Is there any cost to the state? How much latex is being collected? Is it only oil-based? If we were to collect all latex, how much would it cost? Get all those really good figures into one easy document, one fact sheet to read, so that we can pursue support, you know, both through the administration and also at the State House. This is one of the things that I like to do, to take advantage of opportunities to speak to industry stakeholders, grow a little bit of interest, grow some grassroots support. I usually like to come out in person. I just got invited to Wisconsin in the end of February, so feel free to invite me to Michigan in the summer, because I don't think that's going to be a fun trip. But no, we like to get out there. If it's not me, it's going to be somebody else. Talk to folks, answer questions, get everybody comfortable with it. I can come out to Michigan and I can talk to the legislatures, but my voice really doesn't count as much as yours. You're in Michigan, you're the constituent. If you're a municipal government, you're saving money. That's going to go a lot farther than, you know, some lobbyist from D.C. showing up in your state. And then the other thing we could do as we start to sort of build this grassroots support, we start to work actually on the bill language. We have a model bill, but we usually, we always have to get it into shape for the specific state that we're in. So we usually send it out to folks like you in the recycling community and other folks that are interested, and say, what do you think? Is there anything you need to see Michigan specific? And we work out the actual language for the state. While we're doing that, we like to try to identify any state regulatory barriers as well. So if you remember, I said we take latex from everybody. We like to take oil-based from small businesses. Some states do not follow the federal rules and allow conditionally exempt small quantity generators. Some states go a little bit, have more stringent regulations. So we just have to look at that to make sure we make it as easy as possible for a transfer station or a retailer, you know, to collect this paint. Because while the HHW community is very important, and that's usually what we start with as far as infrastructure, if we don't build more infrastructure and make it as convenient as possible for folks to use, A, they won't use it, and B, they'll complain about that 75-cent fee. So we want to make sure that we identify any regulatory barriers to making it as easy as possible for folks to collect this stuff and get it out of the waterways and out of the trash cans. So that's it for me, but obviously I'll be happy to answer any questions either now or, you know, at the end of the Garth's presentation.
All right. Well, thanks so much for the opportunity to be here today. I really want to extend my thanks to the Michigan Recycling Coalition. I will do my best to not repeat a lot of the content that's been covered so far, particularly what Allison just addressed, but I really want to put it in the context specifically for Minnesota in terms of our experience with paint stewardship efforts, as well as just a very quick update on how the program has unfolded since November 1st. It is a very high volume item for local governments, as has been expressed in Minnesota. That translates into about $5 to $6 million annually that was being spent primarily by local governments with just a small amount of assistance from the state. We do have a quite well-developed network of household hazardous waste facilities that are operated by specific counties or regionally by a collective of counties. There are obviously adequate reuse and recycling options. We are very fortunate to have Amazon Environmental Inc., which is a latex paint recycler that is located right in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. And they had been, prior to the implementation of the Paint Care program, just simply collecting and processing paint from HHW facilities, as well as some retailers and contractors. We have heard specifically from the paint retailers in the state about the interest in providing collection opportunities for their customers to drive store traffic and build that customer relationship. The slides don't seem to be advancing. Okay, great. Paint was first identified as a priority product by the Pollution Control Agency in 1999 as part of a state product stewardship policy that was issued by my agency, along with carpet and electronic CRT containing devices. And those were the three priority products that were specifically identified, and those were identified through consultations with local government, as well as analysis regarding opportunities in the waste stream, cost to manage, and so forth. The PCA did convene a specific state-level dialogue in 1999 through 2001 to look at product stewardship opportunities for paint, but then that concluded when the National Paint Product Stewardship Initiative kicked off in 2003. As Allison referenced, it was convened by the Product Stewardship Institute and had broad participation from the ACA members, state and local government, recyclers, U.S. EPA, as well as retailers. There was an MOU that was concluded in 2007 that laid out the elements of state legislation, including the level playing field, antitrust exemption, as well as specifically identifying the financing mechanism. And then we began working with ACA in 2008 regarding legislative activity in Minnesota. I won't go through some of the specific statutory requirements. I think Allison did an excellent job on that. I just wanted to point out a couple things that were particularly relevant for us. One is the enforcement mechanism, which is a do not sell requirement that applies to manufacturers, wholesalers, or retailers who would be selling paint into the state. That is specifically the main point of enforcement that the agency does have. It is very similar to specific provisions that we do have in place for stewardship laws for rechargeable batteries and e-waste. So we do have a kind of defined compliance and enforcement strategy. Is it possible to go back to the previous slide for a moment? Okay, and then very importantly is the product stewardship plan, which really details, provides an opportunity for the industry to design the program and being able to communicate that to not only the state agency, which is required to do the review and approval, but also to the much wider reach of stakeholders that are interested in the program, including very specific language regarding a consultation process to get input from that wide variety of stakeholders before the plan is actually submitted. In terms of some of the specific components of the plan is a description of the system, how the statewide convenience will be achieved to ensure that there is adequate collection between urban areas and greater Minnesota, as well as how specifically the current HHW infrastructure will be considered. Obviously, in the case of some states, this was referenced earlier, as in California or in Minnesota with quite well-developed HHW infrastructure, that is very much of a key piece of the puzzle. In our case, we also asked for Paint Care to provide some specific goals for performance goals, and while those are not necessarily kind of binding in the same way that a defined statutory goal is, we thought that would be very important to be able to communicate what are some of the specific benchmarks and metrics for evaluating the program's success. So in terms of the implementation in Minnesota, the plan was submitted by March 1st of this year with the intention that the program was to begin July 1st, excuse me, although we did have some complications regarding the specific regulatory framework for addressing oil-based paint, and I can talk about that in more detail if folks were interested, since I think it is very important to make sure that there is some of those considerations are addressed as part of the legislative process, or at least if there's an opportunity for the agency to really consider that prior to the anticipated start date of the program. And one of the issues that I do regret is how the agency had addressed that. So I think it's one of those important lessons learned for hopefully that other states can address in a more expedient fashion than we did in Minnesota. We did have to make some specific regulatory changes to be able to facilitate retail collection, and right now we have about approximately 120 retail sites that are providing collection. It's a mix of some of the national chains such as Sherwin-Williams, as well as local mom and pop retail stores. We do have an existing state-administered contract for HHW services, so that is a different approach than most states have taken in terms of statewide pricing that is simply then allows the individual county or regional programs to access that state contract. And so the discussions here have been slightly different than in other states, with the end result that being Paint Care will actually reimburse the HHW programs at least for the near term, rather than hold a separate contract with the HHW program vendors. So just a couple concluding remarks in terms of where things stand right now. I think that, again, the importance of the industry leadership on this issue has been absolutely critical. As many of you know, that there's been a lot of concern about the lack of consistency for, let's just say, the 25 state e-waste programs, and I really have to acknowledge Allison's Allison's foresight on this issue and has really been able to demonstrate the consistency of state policy and programs as possible. And clearly a lot of the other industries that are engaged in that product stewardship discussion have clearly learned from the paint industry about trying to craft a model approach that then can be taken and actually embraced and supported by individual states. However, having said that, obviously, and I think Allison touched on this a bit, is that there is some tension between that overall goal of consistency, but then also being mindful of some very specific local circumstances. And so, you know, that is always at play. But again, I think that, you know, the overall message about the consistency amongst the 8 states that have moved forward is very remarkable. Some of the specific concerns that have been articulated in the case of Minnesota was that the assessment. I think it was more just of a lack of fully understanding how that actually plays out in the marketplace. Both of the other product stewardship statutes that we have in place for rechargeable batteries and e-waste are actually a cost internalization model, so there is no specific assessment. So we did have to spend some time communicating why that was the preferred financing mechanism and how that would actually play out. Some of the contract requirements for local government, obviously that all of those HHW programs and in some cases facilities handle things slightly different in terms of how paint is managed, so we've had to be mindful of that. The importance of needing some clear performance objectives, not necessarily in terms of quantifiable targets, if you will, but just that issue that we are generally facing with solid waste and recycling programs is how do we really go about effectively analyzing their effectiveness. And then collection options for contractors with oil-based paint. We did hear from the Painting Contractors Association about their interest in accessing the collection program. If they are paying the fee, that there was a real strong sense that they should have access to the program, and we really appreciate Paint Care wrestling with that question. It is complicated from a regulatory perspective and so forth, but hopefully that, you know, we'll have some kind of clear resolution and guidance on that for contractors at some point as the program more fully matures. So with that concludes my slides, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions that folks may have. Thank you.
Garth, thank you very much. I apologize for any technical difficulties that that you've been seeing on your side. They seem to be appearing on my side, but I failed to introduce Garth. I failed to introduce Garth, so I do want to give you some perspective from about where he is and who he is and where he comes from. He's a product stewardship team leader for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency with extensive experience around extended producer responsibility issues. So he's really been the lead for the paint care legislation and programming in Minnesota, and I think we have a lot to learn from them. I do have some questions for you right now, Garth, before we open it up to other questions. What was your biggest challenge in getting the retailers and manufacturers on board with this program in your state?
Well, we're really fortunate because at least at the time, and I believe this is still the case, we had 3 ACA members, and so that was really helpful in terms of you know, obviously having a built-in understanding about what the paint industry and the state were trying to achieve with the program, as well as their ability then to work with the larger business community in the state. So we did not have a significant amount of opposition from the business community here. I think that, and as far as specifically the retailers go, as I mentioned, you know, we did have a lot of interest from the local retailers in terms of providing collection opportunities. So it was more of just a sense of being able to kind of set up the process and being able to have those opportunities to really walk through the proposal with the various stakeholder groups. So, you know, I think obviously there was some challenges once the bill moved forward politically, but I think that had very little to do in terms of specific concerns that were being articulated by various members of the business community or local government or what have you.
Garth, if I can ask, what do you think your most significant challenge was in getting this passed?
I think that really sitting down and being able to craft that language that would provide the level of certainty that local government is often looking for with policy changes. You know, so I think that there was a certain, leap of faith is not the kind of correct approach, but again, we had the experience with a manufacturer operated programs was relatively small in the state, and so that transition from I've got sole control for managing and funding my program to one that that changes that calculation, I think, you know, obviously was a process that we needed to work through with various folks. So, you know, I would say it was more just kind of on that thematic question rather than any, you know, real specific concerns associated with paint care or what have you, but really that transition of responsibility, I think, has been was a struggle, and in some cases remains so for some of the local government folks that have been operating programs for some cases, you know, for 25 years.
Yeah, that's an interesting struggle, but one that's not daunting. You know, we in this industry, I think that's exactly what we are doing, is transitioning people from one paradigm to another. So we're at least familiar with doing that. I have another question from Chad Rogers for you. Can you estimate the cost to Minnesota to implement your responsibilities in regards to paint care?
It is well, I can't actually. We have a financing arrangement, as do several other states, that are so it's actually based on actual costs accrued by the agency. And in our case, I think that given the challenges on the regulatory front and so forth, in terms of trying to sort that out and the program delay and so forth, I don't think that the costs borne by the agency up to this point are probably particularly representative for any other state, but I would definitely encourage you to reach out to several of the other states, Vermont, Connecticut, California, and so forth, that have kind of gone down this same path. I mean, obviously, it's going to vary from state to state, but we have added a half-time person to the agency who's specifically responsible for our program implementation. You know, hopefully over time that you know, we will not need that half-time person, but clearly for given the program is just up and running and so forth, and we're still trying to feel out really how much time that's going to be necessary from an FTE standpoint. You know, we'll have to wait and see.
Great. Allison, did you have anything to add or answer to that question I just gave Garth? Really, what the costs are to the state?
Sure. I mean, I think Garth is right. They're going to vary depending on the state. So we usually go to the state agency and we talk about the things that they have to do, like reviewing the plan, like answering, you know, stakeholder comments in the the process of having the plan put out for public comment, helping us basically coordinate with local governments if need be, and talking to the other states and seeing how much time and energy they spent. Generally speaking, we found that it takes about a full-time FTE from the start, meaning before, pre-program, from when it gets signed and all of a sudden all the work begins, but not necessarily the program, through probably about the first year of the program, and then it tends to drop off pretty significantly, in some cases not even a half FTE. So those are discussions we usually have with the agency, and then we try to tailor the statute, or in some cases we've just put it as a line item in the program plan to try to cover at least some of those costs, not all of them. I was remiss actually in telling folks sort of how it works on the ground. I talked about the funding, where it comes from, but I didn't really talk about where it goes. So Paint Care is a what I would call just the funding mechanism for EPR for paint. We don't actually physically do any transportation or collection or recycling. The money comes in, and then we funnel it back out in contracts for collection and for recycling and for transportation, et cetera. So the money that we would collect, we would then come back out to Michigan. We would talk with the HHW community, and every single HHW program is different. So we would talk to you. So what are you doing today? Are you collecting latex? Would you be willing to collect latex? Are you bulking? Would you be willing to, not bulk? Is there a good reason why you're bulking and you want to keep doing it? Do you have any transportation costs, as in you have events around the state, and you're bringing them back, or events around the county, you're bringing them back to one consolidation point? Do you have a reuse program? Do you have a reblending or recycling program? All of those things are value, what we would consider value added, or costs that we would want to pay the municipal governments directly for, and would negotiate on a case-by-case basis. Over and above that, we also will cover, pretty much 100% of the transport costs for these program products, and 100% of the recycling and processing costs for these program products. So, and it can be done in a variety of ways. Like Gar said, Minnesota is pretty new for us. They have this state contract that looks like we're actually going to work through the state contract to reimburse the counties. Generally speaking, we either have a direct contract with you as a municipal government, county or city, or we have an indirect contract with your quote-unquote contractor. So if you have somebody else running your collection facility, then we can contract with them directly to keep doing what they're doing, pay them, and you can reduce your costs under your own contract. So there's a variety of mechanisms, but the funding that comes through basically goes back out into Michigan to pay for folks like eCycle and to reduce the costs of, of the municipal governments that are handling this waste.
Great. And you did mention e-paint in there. How do you, what is your preferred way to interact with contractors? And do you seek in-state contracts, or do you seek to maximize regional contracts? How does that work?
Well, I mean, we're in 8 states, operating 6 now, so unfortunately we haven't had the opportunity to really explore and get some efficiencies with any regional contracts yet, but that's definitely on our radar. Certainly, the more states we get close, and I guess the closest to you would be Minnesota, the better off we're going to be. And I think the Northeast is going to be the first where we can really start to see that come to fruition. For right now, basically what we do is we put out an RFP. Generally speaking, we partner recyclers with transportation haulers if they're not already, or we contract for transportation / recycling all in one fell swoop, or we contract directly with a recycler, and that could be just processing, or some recyclers do have their own fleet of trucks and go around and pick up paint and et cetera, et cetera. So it could be just processing, or it could again be transportation and processing combined. So we put out an RFP. We ask for bids for transportation, for processing, for bundled costs, for pretty much any way you want to do it. And then we evaluate it from there. I will say that generally speaking, we like to use in-state processors. Not only does it keep the paint sort of local, it generally reduces our transportation costs. And in some cases, right now, a good example on the East Coast is that we're shipping paint from the East Coast to Illinois, and that's a lot of transport costs. It's a lot of transport environmental degradation, and the more processors that we have locally, the better we're going to be in reducing both the environmental and cost impacts of that transport. So, and I hope as we build more states and we have more capacity, folks like Jim, who's looking for that paint, can actually, really increase their business opportunities.
Excellent, excellent. I would also like to ask you, Allison, you mentioned a convenience goal of about, what, 15 square radius square mile. How did you guys come up with that number, or that standard?
That's a good question. It kind of grew organically. Right now we use a GIS firm, so it's really, really mathematical and statistically based. But when we were putting the pilot program together for Oregon, it was really just the Oregon DEQ and our contractors at the time, Product Care up in Canada, who've been doing this for a really long time, just kind of trying to feel like what would be the right amount of time to get to someplace to dispose of. Like, what would be a good amount of time before you say, that's not worth it. And we came up with about 20 minutes, which came up to be about 15-mile radius. And the other thing we were doing in Oregon was really trying to, and you may have the same issue in Michigan, probably not to the fullest extent, but in Oregon, most of the population is on the West Coast, and it's very concentrated. And then you have huge swaths of land and mountains that nobody's in. So we were also trying to balance the issue between if you have one store in downtown Portland, you're going to meet that convenience criteria because it's within 15 miles of everybody that lives in downtown Portland. But that's not convenient for people in downtown Portland because there's 2 million people there. So we were trying to balance rural versus urban, and we additionally added, in most cases, 15-mile radius plus, one permanent site for every, you name it, 10,000, 40,000, 60,000, whatever residents make sense. Interestingly enough, when we went into Vermont, we had 15-mile radius and one permanent location working off of Oregon for every 40,000 residents. And Vermont had to say to us, we don't have any towns or municipal government, we don't have 40,000 residents in one small area. So we had to, backtrack, and I think we're doing one for every 5,000 there. So it's something that we'll work with the stakeholders in the state to figure out what makes the most sense and balances the coverage in your state for both rural and urban areas.
Hey,
well, it's certainly an interesting question for providing recycling services of all kinds. Yeah, who was that?
Yeah, it's Jim, and I just thought it would be a timely interjection, if I may. We, going back to the first question you had for Garth, what was his challenge about, getting retail locations signed up to accept and collect the paint? We're working on that right now, and we should, besides the the counties that we already work with, in the state, we'll probably have well over 60 collection points real soon. We have a commitment from the Habitat Restores, which there's 43 of them in Michigan, where they're going to serve us as collection points. And then, we have strong interest already from, hardware stores, if you will. And, we're also, we shipped our first load of paint out just recently in a container where we ship our paint for resale in the same container that is the collection container. So when our paint shows up at the store, they simply unload the container and, shelf the paint, and then that container, that same container, services as their collection bin. And so when it's full, we come and pick it up. So, we're making progress. Yeah.
And do residents who bring their paint back to the stores have to pay for recycling?
Yes, correct. Right. Yeah.
And how much is that?
It's $2.
How much is that?
It's $2 per can, and you know, the store keeps a portion, and then, you know, we collect a portion to process it.
Excellent. And Jim, how about frozen latex paint? Can you use that?
Sure, we can. Yeah, we can use it. We have if it's juice, we can use it. And you know, we have actually, we have other ideas of taking paint beyond paint, if you will. But right now, paint is okay being paint, and from a business perspective, it makes sense for us to keep paint into paint right now instead of making other products from it. But we have some good early experiments and initiatives and cooking in the kitchen, if you will, on things to make out of paint that are not paint, and even beyond plastic. So
I would like to answer that question a little bit better, though, for you. About maybe 5% or less of the paint that we get in, we cannot recycle. Some of it is a hard block that ends up in a landfill, but it's less than 5%. Most paint that we get in, we can use.
And not just
that. Is there any other reason? Sorry, is there any other reason besides it being a solid mass that would cause you not to be able to use the paint?
Not really.
Okay. Good. Well, Allison, I have another question here for you, and this probably will be the last question of the day. Do you have any perspective about costs that a community may see as they begin to accept latex paint, because latex is kind of a gateway waste and actually brings people and their additional materials to those communities?
Yes, we've seen it in both scenarios. We've seen that HHW programs that started to collect latex paint again or started to for the first time, it brought a lot of HHW along with it, which is great because that's what you want, but isn't so great when your budget can't handle it. We've also seen the opposite effect where we've had a lot of retail around an HHW, and because, you know, sort of paint's the gateway drug, so to speak, folks are dropping that off now at our retail or transfer station non-HHW collection sites, and therefore not necessarily bringing their HHW, and the HHW sites have seen their HHW decline. So, you know, both scenarios are absolutely, you know, something that we see and that the HHW programs are going to have to plan for.
Good to know. Okay, maybe I have one more question before we sign off here. I'm wondering, maybe especially from, maybe that's not the question. Hold on a second. I apologize. I lost the question, but it was a good one. And now, anyway, this has been a really great discussion. I feel very heartened by the conversations that we've had here. I've already had conversations with Allison that has led me to believe that the American Coatings Association and Paint Care is ready to help Michigan along its way to making this a reality for us. I'm heartened by the fact that the Product Stewardship Institute is working on a fact sheet that we can use to promote this opportunity throughout Michigan. We, the Michigan Recycling Coalition, in kind of conjunction with DEQ partners, are going to continue to work on next steps of developing this idea. We will work to keep you connected and involved in what's going on. There probably will be a critical time when a piece of legislation is introduced, and your testimony may be the tipping point that we need. But it sounds like we've got a lot of eager partners, and this is already a program. Paint Care is already a program that has been successfully applied in many states, and it looks like many states are coming on board. So thank you, Allison, for paving the way for this and making it a reality here. I want to thank all our presenters, Kate Neese, Jim Cosby, Allison Keene, and Garth Pickle. Again, Lisa Ruggiero from the NRC for providing this service to us. Please like the MRC on Facebook. We will post information about this and other developments in programs that we offer on Facebook. We also have a newsletter if you're interested. We did get about 60 participants out of the 90 or so that registered on the call today. I think that's an excellent showing for our first shot at trying to get our heads around what this could mean for Michigan. So, again, I appreciate all of your time and attention to the issue here, and we will do our best to continue moving it forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yep, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Happy holidays.